Hey guys, welcome back. In this workshop, I'm going to show you how to create this cinematic render in Vray for Sketchup using a simple 3D warehouse model from John Luttrop. So I'll show you step by step on how to set up the model. You can see this is a SketchUp scene where we set up the model, the landscape and so on. And we create some nice renders. We also create some renders for Instagram where you can create some cinematic renders like these using the fog effects in Vray for Sketchup. And also produce different lighting scenarios using light mix. So you learn quite a bit in this quick masterclass workshop, and you can use the power of Vray within SketchUp to create awesome renders. You don't need 3ds Max anymore. All you need is just SketchUp and Vray. I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to download the model, set it up, and then take it forward. Alright, so I'm going to use architectural meters for this workshop. Alright, I'm going to delete Neeraj. So delete the SketchUp model. And if you click on the home button here, you can see that these are Neeraj's materials. Now, if you want to clean a SketchUp file, then all you need to do is go to extensions, go to extension warehouse, search for cleanup, and then go ahead and download and install this plugin. So once you've downloaded and installed Cleanup 3, all you need to do is go to extensions, cleanup, click on clean, then click on cleanup with the default settings. So now you can see all those materials go away. Now, if you want to use this template in your future SketchUp workflows, then go to File, click on Save as Template, call this SketchUp Clean, and then you can also set it up as a default template. Also make sure to mention the meters, and then click on Save. So the next time when you open SketchUp, you'll find this plugin without the SketchUp figure. So SketchUp Clean meters. You can also load in certain stuff that you probably use in most projects. And that will be easier instead of loading them up each time you open SketchUp. Alright, so now let's bring in our model. So let's go to Windows, 3D Warehouse. I'm going to use John Luttrop's model. So this is the model that I'm going to use, Diamond Cabin. So click on that. Click on Download and click on Yes. Right, just place it in the center of the scene. Once you've placed it, we can go ahead and clean up this model a bit more. So I'm not going to be using any of these trees because they wouldn't look nice in the renders. Let me just go to tags and see if there's a separate tag for trees. There isn't. So all I need to do is just enter the group, select all these trees, hold Ctrl on your keyboard to select multiple trees, and then press the delete button. Let's see if there's anything else that we need to delete. Alright, this looks good. Now all you need to do is go to extensions, cleanup, and click on clean with last setting. So that would delete the materials from the trees as well. Now we can go ahead and save this file. So press Ctrl S to save, give a name for your file and click on save. Alright, so we have a model ready to go. In the next videos, we'll start setting up the render. So see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'll show you how to use Pureref, which is an awesome plugin to add references and use those references before you start with your render workflow. So you just head to pureref.com, click on Get Pureref, and then download it if you're using Windows or Mac. You can select a custom amount, set it as 0, and then click on Download. Now, if you want to help them out, I would highly recommend that you give them some amount as well, because this plugin or this software is pretty useful and used by a lot of CG artists to create their renders. So once you've installed, you can open Pureref and you'll be introduced to this blank screen. Now, if you want to add stuff into this blank slate, all you need to do is, for example, if I'm going to go to images, google.com, search for forest cabin renders. I'm going for something hazy. So let's copy this. You can just right click, copy, and then you can just Ctrl V here and it would paste it in place. So now I can use this as a reference and as a backdrop before I start the render. The goal for this render is to create an atmospheric scene. So you can see I've collected images where there's sort of a fog in the background. And then I like this bushes in front. So maybe we can implement that in our own scene. And I like the camera angles as well. So we have a nice camera angle here showing the sky. There's a pathway here. There's also some water bodies. So we can sort of try and implement all of these elements in our render. Now what I'll do is I'll sort of minimize this. You can also press Ctrl A and then make it smaller together. There's a couple of useful options in Pureref that you can use, but the basic stuff is just to add your images, make it smaller. You need a right click to move the window about, and then the scroll button to scroll in. So once you scroll in, let's make it even more smaller. And now what I'll do is I'll open SketchUp. I'll move this to the corner here. I'll also Control A to select all of it and make it even more smaller. Make this smaller here. And then I'll press Control T. So this would make it kind of locked in the corner of your screen. So if you press Control T, this will lock this window here. And now when I use SketchUp, I can always see what I want to do. And it's a great way to reference your stuff as well. If you're using two monitors, I would highly recommend placing this window on the other monitor and then working ahead with SketchUp. Alright, so that's how you use Pureref. This is a quick tutorial for you guys. I will be adding a detailed tutorial on various other options you can do with Pureref. For example, if I go to Pureref now, and then press Ctrl D, and then that would sort of make it go away. But if you want to lock it, you just need to open and press Ctrl D. The other options is that if you right click and you go to settings, it has various options here that you can play around with. For example, you can arrange them optimally by pressing Ctrl P, pack all, and optimize as well. So let's try some of these. So if you press Ctrl P here, it would optimize everything. If you press Ctrl Shift P, then it would pack them all together. Alright, so that was a quick tutorial into using Pureref, which is an awesome plugin and which I would highly recommend you guys to use as well. Once you're done setting up or packing your files together, just press Ctrl T to lock it. Make sure you're in Pureref and then press Ctrl T. So now it would lock it, and then you can go ahead and use SketchUp. Alright, so that was a quick tutorial to Pureref. I'll be creating a detailed tutorial which you will be able to check out on my YouTube channel. Alright, so now let's tackle the scene, set up the views, set up the landscape, and so on in the future videos. I'll see you guys next video. Cheers. Alright guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll set up the views. So first thing what I'm going to do is set up a view from the front. So let me just draw a line from this midpoint here, which is going to be a reference line, and drag it out till here. We can place our camera at this point here. So let's go to camera, position camera, and place it here. Alright, that looks good. I can also use the middle mouse button and sort of orbit down a bit so that it's looking up towards the house, which would make it a little more dramatic. Alright, cool. You can also hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan, and then you can bring it down a bit more, and now we can delete this line and we can create our scene. So let's go to scenes and click on the add scene button. Now I'll need to update the scene a bit, so let's make it a 2-point perspective to make the lines perfectly horizontal and vertical, and then I'll right click and click on update. Now I'd like to see how this fits with some compositional grids, for example the rule of thirds. So let's go to our asset editor. Let's go to settings. Let's switch on interactive, use RTX, and I'll use the NVIDIA AI. Now, like I always mentioned in the previous workshops, if you have an older system, stick to CPU and stick to the Vray denoiser for the rest of the course. In my case, I have an RTX graphic card, so I'm going to stick to RTX and NVIDIA AI. Now let's go to render output and switch on save frame to see how much of the render is being rendered. Also change the aspect ratio from 16:9 to 5:4 landscape. Finally, I need to change the field of view, so I'm going to press Z and I'm going to change it to around 35. So it sort of really highlights the house. So you can see that zooms in and the frame is absorbed by the building. So that's what I want. And now I'll just right click and click on update. Now let's run an interactive render. So this is our house, John Lutrop's house. So let's add a background to this image. So let's click on this layers button here and click on background and click on browse to load EXR image file, which you will find in the exercise files. So click on grid 2 from your exercise files folder, click on open, and make sure you click this as foreground option. So this will bring it in front. Alright, so now what I want to do is place this house in the middle of these two grids. So let me do that by moving this window to the right and moving SketchUp window to the left. And I can press H on my keyboard to activate the hand tool and then simply orbit on top. Alright, so this feels more composed because we placed the building right in the middle of the scene and there's equal spacing for the sky and for the ground as well. So once you're happy with this, right click on scene 1 and click on update. Now I'll add this to the history VFP. So you can see that this is from a simple exercise that I used. So I'll need to change the folder. So let's go to options, VFP settings, click on history. Make sure you click on enable and let's change the folder. So I'm going to go to the exercise files and create a folder called VFP. And click on select folder. Click on save and close. And let's add this to the history VFP. Also need to do is make this a 2-point perspective. Drag it down a bit more. Alright, looks good. Now you can just right click and click on update. And we'll use this view for the rest of the course. You can also set up other views, for example, maybe from this side. These grids definitely help you compose your renders better. So I'll create a scene for this as well. So right click on scene 1, click on add. Alright, so we've created 2 of our compositions, which looks good. You can also add this to the history VFP and we can proceed with the next video. I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll set up the lighting in our scene and we're going to use environmental fog and set this up. Alright, so let's go to asset editor, go to settings here. And let's switch on volumetric environment. So there are 2 types of volumetric environment. One is aerial perspective and one is environmental fog. Aerial perspective generally adds a fog or a mist in your scene. Whereas there's more options in environmental fog where it adds particles such as dust, noise and so on. So you can select environmental fog. You can play around with both, and if you feel that aerial perspective works well, then you can go ahead with the aerial perspective. But for this workshop, we'll be using environmental fog. Select environmental fog. Now there are various options here. So the main 2 options is the distance and height, which basically denotes how far the fog is from the camera. For example, this is set at 1000 meters and the height is set at 200 meters. So the fog would be at a distance of 1000 meters from the camera and the height would be set at a distance of 200 meters from the ground. Now the color is the color of the fog. You can change this to maybe blue or orange depending on your mood and artistic taste. Emission is how much light the fog would emit. You can make it more brighter by making this emission color white or dark if you want a darker fog. And emission multiplier is increasing the emissive intensity of the fog within the intensity of the fog color. So let's run an interactive render and tweak the settings and see how it has an effect on the scene. So let's run the interactive render. Alright, so now you can see that we've added some fog. You can see that the fog is up to a height of about 200 meters. So let's play around with these settings here. So I'm going to move this to the right here. Move the SketchUp window to the right and the Vray frame buffer to the left. So now let's change the color. You should also note that this color is affected by the sunlight color as well. That's why you see some amount of dust here. So let's make this kind of orangish. So now it becomes more orange in color. And if you make it more blue, you can see that it merges with the sky color there. Let's keep it white. And if you want to increase the brightness, then of course you can increase the emission. And then if you change the emission multiplier to say, for example, 10, you'll get a brighter fog. Now let's play with the distance. So you can see that the distance set at about 1000 meters from the camera. Let's set this about 500 meters. So now it becomes more foggy. It should be noted that the fog is actually affected by the sunlight and the GI in the sunlight, which basically means how the light is bounced off from the surface and is scattered through the fog. Now, if you want more scattering of the light in the fog, you can switch on something called Scatter GI. So now you can see that the light is even throughout the scene. So this light is scattered evenly throughout the scene because of something called GI bounce. And in this case, the scatter bounce is set at 4. So basically what it means is that the light would fall on the wall, for example, bounce off from the wall, hit the fog, and then bounce 4 times within the fog. Now if you change this to say 8, then you'll have more scattering of the light within the scene. So 4 should suffice. Now let's change the height. For example, if you set this at 100 meters, you can see that the fog height comes down. This is set at 3 meters from the ground. So there's not much of a fog in the scene. So ideal height would be around 100 to 200. Let's set this about 300. So now you can see that it's completely enveloped by the fog. Maybe we can set this at 100. Playing with the fog is also being more artistic till you find the right light in your scene. Alright, this looks cool where we have nice fog in the render. When we add more lights, trees and so on, the render would pop. Alright, so I'm going to stick to these values for now and I'll change this as we progress with the render. Next is effect. So you can see that it gets affected by various elements here, which is the camera rays, the background and the secondary rays. The camera rays is the main light ray which hits the surface. So if I switch this off, you can see that now the fog goes away completely. And secondary rays is the second and third light bounce from the main ray. So you can see that really doesn't affect the scene. And affect background is if you don't want the fog to be affecting the background, then you can switch off affect background as well. But ideally, you need to keep all three of them on for a good artistic render. And finally, affected by, you can make this fog get affected by only certain lights. So you just need to click here and click on select lights and then select the appropriate light. In this case, we just have our sunlight in the scene. For now, we can leave all lights ticked on. You can also, of course, play with the camera here. Now, for example, if you want a brighter scene, you can switch on camera and change the exposure value to say, for example, 12. That would make it a more brighter scene. So if you change the values here, so if you make this 12, then of course you would need to change the values here as well. Now, for example, if I set this to 600, then that would make it a bright, foggy, interactive render. So you would need to first set the right camera value. But in most cases, in architectural renders, a value of around 14 works well. So if you want to see the exact aperture, shutter speed and ISO of this value, you just need to go to advanced camera parameters here. And you can see that the ISO changes. So let's set an aperture value of 4 here. So that would make it more hazy. And we can leave the shutter speed to around 200. This is also playing around with this EV values here. If you want to make it more darker, then you would need to increase the shutter speed. So that would make the scene more darker. It's almost as working with a real life DSLR camera where you need to tweak the right settings to get the lighting in your frame. Alright, so I'm happy with this light setup where we have enough haze. And now when we add more lights like the interior lights and so on, our render will pop. So I'm going to add this to the history UFP and proceed with the rest of the videos in the course. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to make this lighting a little more better by adding trees. And you can see that from this render. Also, if I did a before and after from the previous render, you can see how much of an effect the haze has on the scene. So it's always nice to add an environmental fog to make your renders more cinematic in nature. So you can see that this ground is kind of more brighter than the rest of the scene. So we can make this darker by adding certain trees and also certain elements in the scene. So let's first start off by adding our trees in the scene. So let's go to Chaos Cosmos. You can update Chaos Cosmos if there is an update available for you. It will update in the background. Let's go to 3D models, vegetation and click on trees. So these are the various trees that Chaos Cosmos has to offer. But in our case, since we have a forest kind of a render and since we're trying to replicate more of a winter style forest, we're going to add some coniferous trees in our scene. So we can add this red spruce. So simply click on download, click on add. Now if you see this option where you're unable to add the trees, you can just simply close Chaos Cosmos and open it up again. And then you can add it into your scene. Alright, so I've added trees in our scene. So let's see what these are called as well. By the way, if you want to dock the default tree, you can just drag it to the right and dock it like that. So this is red spruce 01. 02 and 03. Now there are two ways to scatter trees in SketchUp. One is the native Vray Scatter. So I'll show you how to use that. So for that I need to explode this model. So right click on explode. So now we have the side separate and the trees separate as well. And you should also note that for this to work, in Vray Scatter, you do not have an option to exclude objects like you do in Scatter 2 by Lindell software. So you would need to draw or make your topology in such a way that it has openings and that would avoid any trees in these areas. So let's start with Vray Scatter 2. All you need to do is select this object and then from your Vray Utilities toolbar, you need to click on Scatter over selection. So this would make it a scattered host. And now we can add the scattered objects as well. So to do that, go to your asset editor. And then first select your trees. Go to your scatter geometry from the Vray asset editor and click on add guests. So now you can see that it scatters these trees all around the surface. Now the density is a little too much, so I can reduce this. So let's try 0.1. 0.1 feels a bit too much as well, so 0.05. Alright, that looks good. You can also change the probability of certain trees. Now I like the red spruce one a lot more than the others. I'm going to reduce the probability of these to, let's say, 0.1 and 0.05. You can further reduce the density. Alright, this looks better where you can see the trees are scattered all around the host. Now you can play around with these settings as well, where you can rotate the trees to a certain angle. You can also scale them up to make it even bigger or reduce it. So 0.9 to 1.2 is a good scale. And then you can also reduce the number of trees that you want in your scene by reducing the preview percentage. Now if you don't want the trees to intersect with each other, then you can switch on collision detection, and then the trees wouldn't intersect with each other as well. Finally, you can play with the seed value to change different orientations of your trees. So maybe seed 2 works well, where I have some space for the camera as well. So I'm going to go with seed 2. And now there's no option to generate. It will actually show up once you run an interactive render. So let's go to scene 1 and let's see how this affects the scene. Alright, so now you can see that the entire scene gets a lot more darker because of all these trees around. And the reason is because it's not scattering the light onto the face, it's sort of blocking the light. So what you can do is you can go to your asset editor, go to settings, and you can make this brighter by reducing the shutter speed. So now you can see that it becomes a little more brighter. And you can also notice that the light is falling on this side of the wall just because there's some trees here blocking the light towards the house. So let's try to fix that as well. So I'm going to stop the interactive render. Going to add this to the history VFP, and let's check our scatter settings again. If you want to see the scatter again, you just need to select the host and click on scatter viewer. So now you can see these trees here. So you can see that these trees here are sort of blocking the light, especially a lot of trees here. So it's also important to understand the angle of the shadows. So let me just switch this off for a bit and switch on the shadows. So view shadows. So you can either change the shadow angle to make sure that the light is falling on the house. Now you can't really switch on the scatter viewer and then see the shadow of the trees because it's not generated the tree on the object. It's generated it as a proxy viewer which opens only in your Vray Interactive. So if you want to see this, so for example, these trees here are blocking the light falling on the house. So you can either change the shadow settings or you can remove some trees. So let's start with changing the shadow settings. So I'm going to go to shadows here. So you can see that's the evening sun. And you should need to know where the evening sun is as well. So this is the north. So this is why the shadow is falling this way. Let's maybe make it more to the noon or change the month that is. So now you can see the shadows are shorter. So we set it at around June, where the shadow is overhead and not too long in nature. So let's use these settings. So let's go back to scene 1. Let's change this to June and then update the scene. And now let's run interactive render. Alright, so now you can see that it's back to being hazy and you can see a lot of nice light coming into the scene as well. So that's pretty cool. Let's add this to the history VFP. So that is one way. Maybe not too hazy. So maybe we can change it back to maybe September. Let's see how the shadows are. Go to view shadows. Alright, so you can see some light like this. This looks cool. Let's update the scene. Let's run interactive render. Alright, this looks a little more better. We have more dramatic lighting in the scene. You can't see the light here because a lot of trees have blocked that light, which is alright, but that is the focus on the house here. So that's what we need as well. You can see these tree shadows falling on the house as well. Alright, so now I'll stop the interactive render. Add this to the history VFP. Now this sometimes happens where you don't see the preview of the render, but it's actually there. So if you switch on A and B here, you can see the difference between the previous renders. Alright, so I like this lighting setup and we can proceed with this. So right click and click on update. You can go ahead and change the orientation of the trees. We can maybe remove these trees here as well and just choose the Vray Scatter trees. So let's switch on this and let's change the seed value. So let's go to the asset editor, go to scatter here, change the seed value, maybe try 3 this time. Alright, I like this seed value, which is 7, where we have some trees here and we have some trees covering the house as well. I think this should work well. Let's check the other seed values as well. Seed 15 also looks cool. Alright, so let me try with seed 15. Go back to scene 1 and run interactive render. I didn't like this branch here jotting out into the scene, so I'm trying out a different seed value. Alright, so now you can see there's more light in the scene because less of the trees are scattering the light. Maybe seed 15 doesn't work well, so let's try something else. Let's maybe try 7. 7 looks nice, where there is some light. It makes the ground dark and there is light entering from this side of the scene as well. So I'm happy with 7 and we can proceed with lighting number 7 or seed value 7. I'm going to stop the interactive render. We're going to proceed with the rest of the course with this lighting setup. So I'll see you guys next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to add some artificial lights in our scene and make the scene look much better. So this was the render that we got from the previous scene, which looks pretty cinematic in nature. So now we need to add some lights in the scene, especially the interior lights, some lawn lights as well. So to start off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this material. So I'm using the bucket tool, which is B, and I'm holding Alt on my keyboard to sample paint this material. So you can see it's called material. You can change the name of the material here as well. So I'm going to call this glass material. And then that would change in the asset editor. So if I go to my settings here, you can see that it changes the glass material. So let's make this a glass material by increasing reflection to full and increasing refraction to full as well. So this would make it a glass material. If you want to add a tint to this glass, you can change the fog color. If you move the slider to the right, then that would make it more bluish in nature. So let's just move it a bit. So there's a little bluish glass tint on the material. Now what I'll also do is in the bottom, we have an option called can be overridden. So I'm going to switch this off so that when I run an interactive render with material override on, this material wouldn't get affected. So if I go to settings, go to material override and switch this on, you can see that all the materials get overridden by this color material except for the glass. So now if I go to scene 1 and run an interactive render, you can see that our glass material is not affected by that material. Alright, so I'm going to add this to the history VFB. Let's start off by adding some interior lights. Let's see if there are any tags to switch off the walls. There is. Alright, great. Switch off the roof as well. And now we can place some lights. Alright, switched off the windows as well. So the best way to light up your interiors by using a sphere light. So I'm going to add a sphere light from the Vray Lights toolbar. Click once, click twice to place a sphere light. And also make sure to move it on top. So I'm going to place one sphere light here. And I'm going to copy the sphere light using the move tool and place it here as well. So we have 2 sphere lights in the scene. I'm going to change the settings of the sphere light. So let's go to asset editor, go to settings, go to lights, go to sphere light and click on options and make sure the source is invisible. You can also increase the size here. So you can make this bigger or smaller. We won't be changing any of these settings because we will change it in the light mix. Alright, so I placed 2 sphere lights. Now I'll go to my asset editor and add a light mix. So let's click on render elements and click on light mix. Now what I'll do is I'll place a rectangle light on the outside here. So let me just click on rectangle light here and click once and click twice to place a rectangle light. It should be facing from the top. So I'm going to move it on top first to maybe the bottom of this object here, then rotate it. I'm using the arrow keys to change the angle of the rotation or the orientation of the rotate tool. And then I'm moving it up. Make sure none of these lights are intersecting with any SketchUp objects. Alright. You can also hold Ctrl and Alt to sort of move this light uniformly from the center. Alright. And then I'll go to Asset Editor, go to Rectangle Light, and switch off the source for this rectangle light. What I'll also do is I'll change the directionality so there's more light falling on the chairs. Finally, you need to go to Settings, Environmental Fog, and then you need to select which of these lights are getting affected in the scene. So click on Select Lights. I'm going to select sunlight and the rectangle light because it's placed outside. The sphere light is inside the scene, so I don't want it to get affected by the fog. Now I'll go back to scene 1. You can see all the tags come back up because that was switched on in the scene. And I'll run an interactive render. Alright, now I'll go to Source Light Mix and I'll increase the value of the rectangle light. Let's make it 10. So now you can see that sort of affects that entire front part of the scene, and we can also change the color. So you can click on the color option and make it sort of warm. And then we can also change the values of the sphere light inside the render. Let's switch off the rectangle light so you can see that sphere light inside gets lit up, and let's change the values here as well. You can also increase them a bit more to make it more brighter, or you can add more lights in the scene. Alright, that looks good. Now when I switch on the rectangle light in front, it sort of adds some extra noise here. So that's not ideal. So maybe we can just reduce this value maybe to 2. And that looks better. Alright. What I'll also do is I'll adjust the photographic composition of this render because you can see more of the ground and less of the sky. So I'm going to stop the interactive render. I'm going to use the hand tool. So activate the hand tool. And then simply just move it up a bit, then update the scene. So let's run interactive render again. We can move it a bit more up. And this looks a little bit better than the previous composition. Now we can add some lights on the ground as well. So I'm going to go to Windows, 3D arrows, search for bollards. I'm just going to add the first bollard light and place it in the scene. Alright, so now what I'll do is I'll just move it in place. And you'll use the move and copy tool to place this at various points on the ground. You can also tap Ctrl twice. And then you can place this anywhere in the scene without having to get rid of the move option. Alright. Hopefully this is a component. So now if I add a light to one of these components, it would add the light to all of them. So let's enter the group. You can see that we can select this object here, which is a circular glass. So you can enter this component, select this group. So you can see it selects a group of all the similar components. And then we can click on Convert to Mesh Light. So that would make it a light source. Alright, so now I'll go back to scene 1. I'll go to my asset editor, go to settings, go to the render elements and go to light mix settings. And I'll change the group by individual lights to group by instance. And what this would do is instead of listing out each light one by one, it will group these lights by instances. So I'm going to click on group by instances and I'm going to run an interactive render. Alright, so now you can see these bollards coming up in the render as well, which looks cool. And we can change the values here. So let's say if you change the mesh light to say 10, so that will make the bollard light more brighter. You can also change the color of the bollard light, make it sort of warmer. And then we can change the rectangle light as well. Maybe not use the rectangle light as much. Just keep it around 2. And change the color to warm. Let's increase the sphere light, 10 and 10. Make this warmer as well. 20 works better. And now what I'll do is I'll add some layers. So let's add an exposure layer. And let's increase the exposure a bit more to make it sort of brighter. And if you see that there are some highlight burns in the area, then you can reduce the highlight burns and increase the exposure a bit more. You can also increase the contrast. Let's add a curve, sort of make it boost the highlights and the shadows by making an S curve. And I can also try switching on the lens effect to just sort of boost these lights here. Finally, you can add a white balance and make it either more warm render or a more cooler temperature render. So I'll just keep it in the middle for now and change it later. Alright, so we placed our artificial lights as well, which looks nice. And I'll finally save this light mix out because I don't want to keep changing the values here. So click on save and call this light mix easy and click on save. Finally add this to the history VFP and let's do a before and after. Generally the light mix only works when the AB horizontal is not activated. Alright, so we've made good progress in the render so far. Now we'll start tweaking the materials and set this up for a final render. See you guys next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to add the grass in our scene using the Vray Scatter plugin. Alright, so in Vray Scatter, you can't really add two different compositions like you do in Skatter 2, which I will be explaining in another video. So what you need to do is move this object up. So I'm going to select this host, use the move tool and move it up by 0.01 meters, which is around 10 mm. Alright, so I've moved this up. Now I'll right click and click on explode. So now you can see that line goes away, which means it's not a scattered object anymore. So let's hide this. But this is still a scattered object. So we'll need to select the scattered object. You can click on the edges here to select it and click on F2 to hide, or you can go to head edit and click on hide as well. Right, so now we're going to add a new scattered object. So select the host and click on scatter over selection. Now we need to add some grass elements into our scene. So let's open Chaos Cosmos. Let's go to 3D models, vegetation, flowers, grass and rocks. And then you scroll in the bottom, you'll find some nice field grass elements. So I'm going to bring in field grass 7, place it in the scene, and field grass 6 as well. Let's see if field grass 8 is good. Yeah, field grass 8 is more thick and that's what I need. So we have two elements. Now we'll just go to our asset editor, go to geometries. I'm going to rename this because this is scatter tree. And I'm going to rename this because this is scatter grass. Alright. Now let's add our guests. Select the elements first. And then click on add guests. Alright, so now you can see it starts scattering on this ground. Now there are a few settings you need to change. For example here, I would like the scattered objects to follow along the normals of the surface. So let's change the orientation from world up to along normals. So now you can see it comes on the slope as well. And let's increase the density to say 30. So now you can see that it scatters pretty evenly along the entire surface. You can leave the rest of the settings as is. And now we can go back to scene 1 and run an interactive render. Alright, so now you can see the grass elements. Let's switch off the material override. So let's switch off the interactive render. Go to asset editor, go to settings and switch off material override. And let's run the interactive render in the frame buffer or in the SketchUp window. So you just need to click on viewport render here. And now you can see the grass in the scene. How cool is that? We may have to increase the density. So let me stop the render. Let me also switch off volumetric environment because I want to see the material better. And let's go to scatter grass and increase the density maybe to 40 and render with Vray Interactive. I generally prefer using Vray Interactive, but you guys can use the viewport render as well. Alright, so now you can see that the grass material comes in. It looks nice. It gives a very realistic feel to the render as well. And then you can see the lighting inside the scene. If it feels a little too much, then you can reduce the lighting inside. 10 looks good. And we can see that there's a lot of shade in this part of the render. So I would like to bring in some light into the scene. Alright, now let's just switch on the environment as well. So let's switch off the interactive render. And go to settings. And switch on the volumetric environment. Let's run the interactive render. Right, the setting seems to have been changed. So we'll have to just adjust that again. Let's switch on scatter GI to scatter the light throughout the scene. And let's change the distance. Get a more foggy effect. Now you can see that there is no light here. Even if I switch off the environment light, you can see that it's covered by the trees. surrounding this house. So what I'll do is I'll stop the interactive render and I'll go to my scatter settings and I'll sort of reduce the density a bit more. Keep it around 0.0. Let's see how this has an effect on the scene. 0.01 seems too much, so 0.001. Alright, that seems to have reduced the number of trees. Let me just try 0.005 as well. Okay, now there's hardly any trees in the scene, so maybe just bring it closer. Alright, 0.009. Let's run an interactive render. Okay, it seems to be the same. So let's stop the render. We just go to the top view for better understanding of the trees. Let's bring this down to 0.005. Alright, so that's definitely reduced the number of trees. Alright, 0.002. Let's see how this looks. Let's switch on the fog as well. Make sure the lights are only affected by the rectangle light, the sunlight, and the mesh light. Alright, great. So now you can see there's some light on the ground as well. I would also recommend that you remove the Vray Scatter for trees and place the trees manually so that you can sort of add some shadow effects on the ground here as well. Or you can use the existing scatter of the Vray trees and additionally place some trees to add some shadow effects on the ground. I can do that quickly to show you guys. So I'm going to switch off the Vray preview of the scatter element because it's a little CPU intensive, and let's move these trees in place. I'm going to move one here. Let me see how the shadows are falling in place as well. So you can see that the shadows are falling this way. So I'm going to place some trees this here and maybe place some trees here as well. So now if I switch on shadows, you can see that it covers that part of the ground. So let's go back to scene 1. Maybe move the tree a bit more in to the frame. And let's switch on the shadows and see if it's falling on the ground. It is. You can see that it falls on this part of the ground here. So I'm just going to move it out a bit. Alright, that looks better. Let's go back to scene 1. Let's run it on the viewport. So now you can see that we have a nice shadow effect on the ground. Now if you want to make the shadows more softer, you can do that as well. Just go to your light settings, go to sunlight, and just change the size multiplier to say 3. That would make the shadow softer. Let's go back to scene 1. Alright, and we have a final render. You can go ahead and increase the density of the grass as well. So for example, let's just go to our scatter settings here. Go to grass and let's increase this to say 50. And now if you run an interactive render, we may have to increase it a bit more. Let's increase the probability of field grass 8 because that's slightly bigger. So we can reduce field grass 7 to say maybe 0.1. And then let's run an interactive render. So now you can see that most of it is covered, except for a few patches here and there. You don't have to worry too much about these patches because I will be showing how to use a moss material and create some green moss in your land as well. Alright, so in the next video, I'm going to be using the Skatter 2 plugin by Lentil software to use the trees and grass because there is more creative flexibility with Skatter 2 as it has a lot more features, and I will be showing it to you in the next video. Now, if you do not have the software, you can skip the next video and jump to the final lighting and final render of this workshop. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be using the Skatter 2 plugin to scatter trees and grass in our scene. So the first thing what I'm going to do is delete the top plane. And we're only going to use the down plane here. And I also need to delete these scatter objects. So let's open Asset Editor. And let's select Scatter 3 and click on Delete. Alright. So first let's create the tree composition. So click on the composition editor here. So we're going to create a new composition called this tree composition. And let's select the host. So click on pick surface to select the host. Let's click on that again and then select the host. And now you can see the different points that it's going to scatter the tree. So these are quite a lot of points for trees. So we'll have to reduce the density. So we can drag the slider to the left so that you can see that definitely reduces the number of trees on the plane. And we can also add objects to exclude. But first, let's just add the scattered objects. So click on this button here, create new objects, and select all the trees. So you selected the trees, three of them, and you can see that still feels a little too dense. So we can reduce it. Or we can also create a mask and mask out the areas where we don't want to see the trees. So let's click on add a paint mask. Let's increase the mask size. And now when we start painting, by clicking and holding, you can see that trees are created only on this painted area. But if you click on the exclude object, then it would exclude that area and not add trees there. How cool is that? And we can also scroll to the bottom and set a scene. For example, if I set just scene 1 and switch on exclude non-visible, you can see that none of the trees show up here. How cool is that? I can also increase the camera offset. So you can see that this is the camera point here. If you sort of increase the camera offset or sort of make the value more, you can see more number of trees showing up in the camera. I can definitely reduce the number of masked trees here by using the clipping plane. So just switch on distance clipping and reduce the distance. So let's keep trees up to about 55 meters, which looks good. And we can of course reduce the density further. So now you can see we have only these many trees, which is perfect for this scene. Now we can also randomly rotate and scale. So let's click on random scale under transformations and scale it from 80 to 120 equally on all three coordinates. And then we can also randomly translate if you want to bring the tree down and so on, or move it in the X and Y coordinates, and randomly rotate as well. And you can rotate it in 0 to 360 and more. So let's just keep it 0 to 360. You can also of course add a bigger mask in case you want to hide certain trees. So if I click on paint mask here, and if I add to it, you can see that those trees goes away. Similarly close to the camera as well. So what I will do is I will switch off exclude non-visible, and I'll add a mask here to hide some trees. So let's go back, click on edit, and let's just create a mask there around the camera as well. Maybe somewhere here. Now the light is falling from this direction, so maybe I can just delete the trees here. So now you can see that we have more flexibility with the trees. And once you're done, instead of clicking generate now, you can click on render only mode, and these trees will only show up in the interactive render. So let's click on generate. Alright, so we generated the trees. I did make some changes so that there's more trees in the scene. Now let's run an interactive render before we proceed. So let's go back to scene 1. Now I can remove this tree, of course. Sometimes when you generate trees or grass in Skatter 2, it adds that object to the origin point, which is 0, 0, 0. So you can just right click, unlock, and move it aside. Right, let's go back to scene 1. Go to Asset Editor, go to Settings, and click on Render with Vray Interactive. Alright, so we got quite a lot of trees in the scene. Let's adjust them a bit. So we can remove these kind of trees. Let's stop the render. Let's see where the shadows are falling. So you can see that these trees are creating a big shadow here. So you can remove those. Alright, so I'm going to select all of these trees, move it aside. And I'll open the composition editor and click on edit. You can see there's some nice light coming in. Let's maybe edit the mask. So let's go to the mask here. And since the shadow is falling this way, I'm just going to remove some trees here. Some trees here as well. Alright. So we have one tree there and some trees around. Let's see how this looks. Click on generate, go back to scene 1, render with Vray Interactive. Alright, so now you can see there's lesser shadows or hardly any shadows on the ground now. It's pretty bright, so we need to adjust the settings. So let's make the exposure value 14. That will make it darker. And let's remove the trees around the house a bit as well. You can see that it's sort of engulfing the house. Click on edit here. Remove the trees around. Let me add some trees here. So we can just click on the eraser tool and then delete some of these masks to add the trees. Alright, so I've added some trees. Alright, and click on generate and go back to scene 1. Now let's run in, drag to render in the viewport. Alright, so you can see that the house is engulfed by trees. No trees here, that's why you don't see shadows on the ground. Now if you want to see longer shadows, you can make the shadows longer. So that would work better. So we can do that as well. So I'm going to change the shadow settings. So let's go to shadows here and make it longer. So you will see the shadows update. You can see it becomes longer. 315 seems a bit too much. So let's keep it to 46, 43. 223 looks good. Let's go back to scene 1 and update that setting. Alright, so let's change this to 14. And now you can see that we have some nice shadows on the ground as well. Alright, so we're getting there. If the scene is a little too dark, you can of course adjust the environment settings. So let's go to the settings here and maybe change this to 700 or even 800. And you'll see more of the house. And then of course, if you need softer shadows on the ground, you need to adjust the sun settings. So we can increase the size multiplier and that would make the shadow softer. So I'm going to save this file because we made good progress so far. And I think we've set up a decent lighting setup as well. You can see that I can see the sky. So the composition is coming to life as well. Alright, so now I can add some nice grass to the scene. So if you already added our objects from the Chaos Cosmos library, if you haven't added it yet, you can just go to Chaos Cosmos, go to 3D models, vegetation, grass and rocks. And when you scroll to the bottom, you'll find these field grasses. What I'll also do is add some of these Mexican feather grass. So just add that in. Alright, so that is engulfing that. Just move to the side. And let's see if we need maybe this as well. Alright, great. And maybe even these giant feather grasses. Alright, first I will scatter the main grass, which is field grass 7 and field grass 8. So let's select the host again, create a new composition. Call this grass composition. Select the host. Alright, and now let's select the grass. So click on the scattered objects and select these two. So now you can see it starts scattering. So let's increase the density. You can see that it's sort of just scattering this way. So if you want to scatter it along the slope, all you need to do is go to pointing and make sure the normal is up to 100%. So now you can see that start scattering along the slope as well. You can keep it to around 89. Don't keep it up to 100. So you get that nice scattering effect. Alright, so I'm going to do the same for the grass where I want to exclude non-visible objects. So I'm going to click on scene 1, exclude non-visible. So now you can see it reduces, and I'll also switch on distance clipping. Let me reduce the distance further. And we increase the field of view and reduce the distance. Alright, that looks better. And now of course I can increase the density. I can also randomly scale. Let's increase the scale size to say 150. Randomly translate. And randomly rotate as well. Let's increase the density a bit more because I see some patches here and there. So let's make this 50 maybe. Let's increase the size to about 200. And let's click on generate. We generated our grass. Now let's go to scene 1. We can also sort of mask out certain regions. Maybe if you don't want grass around this area, you can do that. So let's do that quickly. So let's add a mask. Increase the size a bit. So I'm going to draw a pathway from here around the house. And once you've done that, click on invert. Let's add the mask again. So now you can see that it's added grass around. So you just need to click on invert. and the grass goes away in those areas. Let's further add the mask. Alright, great. Looks good. So let's click on generate. And what I'll also do is move our field grass close to the camera point and move this away. So let's click on scene 1 and let's run an interactive render. Before that, let me just move this in place. Alright, and then I'm going to move it down. Let's see what kind of an effect we get. Alright, so let's run an interactive render. Now you should definitely see the grass change. You see some nice grass in the scene. Let me just lock this. I'll move this to the side. Let's lock the camera orientation. And now what I'll do is I'll move these in place. So now you can see some of that grass coming into the frame, which is pretty cool. Let's move it down a bit. Maybe by 0.1. I like that effect. You can, of course, move it away from the camera as well. So if I move it here, let me hide these. Now you can see some of the grass in the scene, which looks cool. Alright, let me just bring it back. Delete these. And maximize the window. Go back to scene 1 and open the frame buffer. Unlock the view. Stop the Vray Interactive and re-render the scene. Alright, so now you can see the render better. Let's move these down. And I like it like this. Just sort of coming out from the grass. Alright, so our render is coming to life. And next few videos, we'll set up the materials and then set up the final render. Don't forget to add this to the history VFP. So I'm going to stop the render. Go to my history VFP and then add this here. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this green algae material or maybe even like a sort of a stream water material and add it to our scene. Alright, to start off, I'm going to open Asset Editor. I'm going to right click on materials and click on blend material. I'm going to rename this, call this blend main. So the blend material will have 2 or 3 more materials based on a base material and a coat material. So let's create the base material. So right click, click on generic. Let's rename this, call this blend main, blend base that is. And let's create another material, rename this and call this blend coat. Alright, so the blend base material, I'm going to make it sort of a grass texture material. Or what we can also do is, we can use this material, which is vegetation honey local. Use the bitmap here. Now, I forgot to save the bitmap, so I'm going to quickly save that out. So go to extensions, Vray, file path, editor. I'm going to select all of these materials. Click on archive and repath. I'm going to create a folder called maps. I'm going to save these bitmaps there. So now what we can do is, I can copy this, go to my blend base material, paste it here in the text slot. Now let's go to the blend main material and add the blend base to the base material. And let's add a coat. So the coat is going to be a reflective material. So let's add some reflection and some refraction. So this would make it sort of a reflective water material. Now let's add that to the coat. So let's click on add coat. And let's add blend coat here. So now you can see it makes it reflective. Now I just want some parts of the material to be reflective and not all. So I can add a mask here. So click here and let's add a noise A material. Now we can decrease the frequency to make it sort of bigger. And we can increase the amplitude. So the white parts would be reflective and the black parts would be less reflective. Alright, let's try something like this. The reflection being applied only on the green part of the material. Alright, so now we need to apply this blend base material on the ground. So let's select the ground, use the bucket tool, make sure it's blend main, and then apply the material. Now you can see that it's applied. Let's increase the size. So let's go to edit. Let's make it 2 meters. And what I'll also do is I click on triplanar projection world so that the UVs are mapped properly. This looks good. Now let's run an interactive render. Before that, I need to create the stream using the composition editor. So let's go to composition editor, go to grass composition. So I'm going to create a stream that flows around this part of the grass site. So let's edit the mask, make it about 2 meters long, and simply drag a selection like this from one end to the other end. Now you can see that we created a nice stream. So now let's see how this looks in the scene. Don't forget to click on generate as well. Let's go back to scene 1 and let's run a viewport render. Alright, so now you can see that green grass material or that moss material on the model. Sort of zoom out. Now let's check the composition editor for the grass. We may have to increase the density because you can see those patches here and there. So let's increase the density. And also reduce the field of view. On generate. Let's adjust that material a bit, which is a blend main material. Let's make the base material the water material. So let's change this to blend coat. I'm going to rename this, call this water. And let's change the coat material to the base material. So this looks better. I'm going to rename this as well. Alright, so now you can see that we have our green material blended on top of our water material, which looks nice. And we can of course adjust these settings to see more of the green material. Alright, so now let's go back to scene 1. Let's hide this for now. And let's run a viewport render. Alright, this looks much better. You can see our stream flowing through as well, with some patches here and there of the green algae. Let's see how this looks without the environment light. So I'm going to switch off the environmental fog. And now you can clearly see the water material. So let's go back to scene 1. We could maybe add more, make the stream a little bigger. So let's see more of the stream and then the grass. So you can do that quickly. So let's go to composition editor, click on grass composition, edit that. Let's edit our mask. Let me just make this bigger. Let's erase some of the mask because I want to see more of the grass at the background. So let's just erase some of this here. Now we have a small stream flowing in. Alright, let's see how this looks. So now we can definitely see some water in the scene. So let's run interactive render. And now this looks pretty cool. It's a green algae effect as well. Let's switch on the environment fog. We have the reflection of the light on the material as well. How cool is that? So let's switch on the environmental fog and then run an interactive render. I may want to adjust the green moss material a bit because I don't like this texture here showing up like that. So let me just stop the render. Go to materials. Select the green coat material. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to just select some green from here. That looks better. We can of course add a bump to it. So you go to bump. Let's maybe add some noise. Increase the frequency. And you can see that nice bump there. Maybe reduce the bump. And now we have a nice bumpy material as well. Alright, let's run interactive render. Now, this seems a little too saturated. So we can just go here. Make it sort of darker. Let me try adding a material from Chaos Cosmos instead. So let's go for this grass tree roots or the grass stones and sticks. And let's add that to the coat material. Let's run an interactive render again. Alright, so I'm happy with this. Material looks better than before. Always get into the habit of using realistic materials. You can always also learn from how Chaos Cosmos have created their materials. For example, this material here. You can see that it has a bitmap and also has a bump map and some reflections as well, reflection maps. I don't like this part, so maybe I could just delete that part from the composition editor and maybe just erase some of this parts here. Alright, let's click on generate. Go back to scene 1. Let's see how the composition looks in scene 1. Just going to delete some of the masks here because I want to see more grass in front. And then I'll create a mask again. This is a CPU intensive process, so you definitely need a good system to create grass materials or grass in Vray for Sketchup. Alright, so I'm happy with this. Let's see how it looks in scene 1. You can see some grass in front and then the materials there. And then the stream there. So let's click on generate. And let's run the interactive render. Alright, this looks cool. Maybe just bring the grass down a bit so I can see more of the pond, so you can do that as well. Just go to the composition editor again and bring it down to say -5 or -2. That would bring it down a bit too much, so maybe -1 or -0.1. Let's see, -0.3 maybe. 0.2 should do the trick. Let's click on generate. And let's run the interactive render. Alright, so now you can see a lot more streams in the scene, which looks pretty cool. Sort of like a grassland. I'm going to leave it like this because I like this effect. Some grass patches with some streams in the scene as well. And some reflections of the house. How cool is that? Alright, so I'm going to stop the render and add this to the H3VFP. The next video, we'll set up the architectural materials and then we'll set it up for the final render. See you guys next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to set up the architectural materials and also adjust some of the materials in the scene. Alright, to start off, I'm going to reduce the size of this garden lamp here because it's about 6 inches or 150 mm. So enter the group, select the entire object, use the scale tool and simply scale it down. So now it's around 100 mm or 4 inches. That looks much better because that was sort of being the focus in the scene. And what I'll also do is move this in a bit because it's right in front of the camera. Alright. Now we'll start off with the materials. Let's start with the wood materials. I'm going to use the bucket tool and hold Alt on my keyboard to select these materials. It's a quick way to select materials. And then I just need to open the material settings and add some reflections. So that's all you need to do. Since this is an architectural render, you don't really need to add too much details in the materials because it won't be seen as well. So for the fabric material, you can add some sheen to add that fabric effect. So now if I make this a fabric preview, you can see that you get that fabric material. So let's quickly go ahead and add reflections to all our materials in the scene. What I'll also do is, now so you can see this is a repeating pattern. It won't be seen in the render, but if you want to make the pattern sort of random in nature, you can just open the material setting in the diffuse texture slot, go to texture placement, change 2D UV channel to mapping source. Click here and click on UVW placement. And then in the bottom, you can change this to stochastic tiling and give a seed amount. So this would randomize the texture in the scene. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and adjust all the other materials. Alright guys, so I've added enough reflections in the scene. Now I'll create my lamp material here. So let me just create a two-sided material. Right click on material and click on two-sided. Rename this, call this main. Now I'll apply a material. Let's go with orange here. You can use any material that you like. And if you want to make it more opaque, you can drag this slider to the left. And if you may drag the slider to the right, that would make it more translucent or transparent. So we'll keep it close to the transparent side. And then we'll apply this material on the face. So once you've applied, just click on triplanar projection world. So the UVs are applied uniformly as well. You can click on triplanar projection world sphere. And then the UVs would be applied uniformly. Now what we'll also do is enter this group. First, let me just rename all the lights. So we have a sphere light, which is the room light. And we have this rectangle light, which is outside. Call this the platform light. And this is an extra light, which we can delete. Let me just check this material as well. So it's a simple material. So let's maybe just make this material a mesh light. So we can make this a group. Select the group and click on convert to mesh light. So this would make it a light. Now let's rename that light. Call this low lamp light. Alright, so we've added all our lights. Let's go back to scene 1. And we adjusted the materials as well. And let's click on render with Vray Interactive. Alright, so SketchUp crashed. Hopefully it saved a version of the file. So sometimes this happens where SketchUp crashes. Make sure you always save before you run your interactive renders. So you can see it's recovered the file. So make sure you open the recovery file. I'm going to save this file out, and you can notice that again I have to make few changes which I made in the last 5 minutes. Now if you want to change the number of times it autosaves, you can just go to Windows Preferences, go to General, switch on Autosave, and you can save this to maybe keep it at 5 minutes, or you can also keep it at 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But I think 5 minutes should suffice. So let's quickly change the settings for all of these again. Add some reflection to our basement material wall as well. And now let's just go back to scene 1. Save this file. Then go to settings and run an interactive render. Alright, this looks pretty cool. And we can set this up for our final render in the next video. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome to our final few videos in this course. Now we're going to set up the final render. Before that, I'm just going to add some additional elements, like for example, a human figure, just to add that life, extra life into the render. So I'm going to go to the Chaos Cosmos library, go to 3D models, people, and let's go for sitting this time. And I'm going to download Hideki. Looks pretty cool. I'll bring in Terrell as well. So let's bring in Terrell, place him here, and let's bring in Hideki and place her next to. Alright, cool. So we have 2 models in the scene, 2 lovebirds. Alright, so let's go to scene 1 now, and let's run an interactive render. Alright, so now let's play with the source light mix here. So the sunlight looks nice, but let's try going for a darker scene. So you can see that this makes the scene darker, which looks pretty cool. The reflection on the ground looks nice as well. And let's play with the environment light. Now, for example, if I make this 2, you can see there's more fog in the render. So let's keep it around 2. And again, let's change the environment light as well to make it more darker. Sort of a night render scene. Let's increase the sphere light inside to say 20 to make that brighter. Alright. This is what happens when you switch off the sunlight. So let's switch on the sunlight. And let's bring in more fog. So let's go to Asset Editor, go to Settings, Volumetric Environment, and change this to maybe 600. So now there's more fog in the scene. Let's remove some of the trees around the house because I can't really see the detail of the architecture element. So I'm going to stop the interactive render. And this time what I'll do is I'll go to my composition editor, click on Recompositions. And instead of generating render only, I'll just generate the models. So now we can see the models, and we can delete the ones which we don't need. Enter the group and maybe delete this. Let's delete some of these as well. You can see more of the sky and maybe some of these. See more of the ground there. Let's switch on the shadows and see how this looks. So you can see some lighting happening. So maybe I can just move one tree inside. Alright, so that's quite a lot of lighting in the scene, which is always nice. Make sure to switch off shadows before you're moving stuff because it's a little bit CPU intensive. Alright, let's go to scene 1. Let's maybe just move these trees around so I can see more of the sky. Switch on the shadows. You can see some shadows here. Let's move this in a bit. Go back to scene 1. Let's check out the shadows again. Alright, that looks nice. I would like some shadows on the foreground as well. Let me see if I can move this a bit away. Now I think this should work well. Alright, so we have a nice shadow effect like this. Alright, let's see how this render looks. So let's run an interactive render. Alright, this looks pretty cool. We have some light coming in onto the house like that. What I'll also do is I'll sort of increase the distance of the environmental fog, but I'll also increase the height. So let's keep this to around 500. So we have more even fog in the render. Make sure these lights are not affected by the sphere light. Alright, looks good. And now we can adjust the lights a bit more. So we have our sphere lights here, mesh light that is, which is the lamp light. So I'm going to make it 10, make it more orangish. If I switch out the sphere light, you can see those lamp lights. But let's keep on the sphere lights in the scene. And what I'll also do is make the environment light more brighter. This looks nice. Let's add some additional layers as well. For example, maybe a filmic tone map. And let's reduce the opacity of this. It's not too much. You can also, of course, increase the lens effect to get that light effect on our flow lamps there, which looks cool. And let's also change the zoom effect. So maybe let's try 30. You can see that this tree is sort of overlapping with the roof. So let's move this tree away. Enter the group. Move this tree a bit away. Similarly, these trees. All right. Of course, increase the length of the shadow by making it more longer. So I'm going to go with 245. Let's go back to scene 1. So 245. Update the scene and run the Vray Interactive. That looks really nice. And now we can set it up for our final render. I'll also try creating additional views. So let's go to scene 2. Let's place our view again. So I'm going to place multiple views in the scene. Let's click on the zoom maximum. Alright, so now let me just place my camera like this. Create a scene. Now we can have scene 2 as a scene as well, which looks nice. Scene 3 looks better. So let's render scene 3 again. Alright, this looks pretty cool. We have some reflections of the wall on this stream here, which looks pretty cool as well. Maybe just show more of the sky. Make it 2-point perspective, then update the scene. We can also try portrait render. So for example, just change this to 4:5 portrait. So now you can see a lot of the sky as well. And let's change the field of view. So let's maybe go back to 30 and switch on 2-point perspective. Maybe update the scene and run an interactive render. That looks pretty cool as well with the night sky. Maybe show more of the ground. You can also, of course, switch on the background here. So let's bring the house to the center of the scene and now we can see it better. You can also, of course, zoom out. This looks pretty cool. Let me stop the render, update the scene, and now we'll set it up for our final render. So let's go back to scene 1. Now you guys can go ahead and render either a portrait or a landscape render. Just make sure you change the settings here. So I'm going to go for 16:9 this time. So I get a nice big cover for the course page as well. Go switch on 2-point perspective is on. Use the hand tool and sort of show some of the sky. And let's run an interactive render. That looks pretty cool. I can see a lot of the trees, the sky, and the house settings kind of in the center. I could bring it up a little bit more, but I'll sort of crop out the sky. I like to see the sky in the scene. This looks pretty decent. And let me just adjust it a bit more. Just some subtle touches. Just making sure the window is sitting right in the center of the frame. Alright, so I'm happy with this. I'm going to run a final render. So I'm going to stop the render here. I'm going to save this file out. I'm going to add some render elements. So let's add a reflection render element. Let's add a refraction. You can add self-illumination if you want to change the background in Photoshop. And you can add background as well to change the background if you're using the environment light. And let's add cryptomatte render element to change the materials. And the atmosphere to add additional atmosphere in the render. Let's set the render settings. This time I'm going to use RTX and NVIDIA AI for the final render because it's faster. And I'm going to set this to 1920 by 1080. Now you can either use the progressive render mode by switching off interactive and just keeping progressive on. Make sure the quality is high plus. And here you can set the timing as well. So for example, if you set the time limit, you can maybe set it to 15 minutes. You'll get a decent render. Of course, the longer you set the time, the better clarity render you get. I'm going to try one render with the bucket render mode, and if it's taking too long, I will switch to the progressive render. So I'll switch off progressive for now and use the bucket render mode. Bucket render mode can take longer, upwards of 1 hour to 2 hours depending on your PC system. Finally, just save this file. Make sure to click on the right scene. So never forget to update your scene, guys, otherwise you'll have to go through the entire process again. So I'm going to quickly adjust my camera again. Alright guys, so I've adjusted all the settings again and it looks perfect. So you can see that this is how our final render will look. This is of course a test render. So once we do the final render, all the extra noise should go away. And it should look something like this. So once you're happy with all the settings, just click on the render button. Make sure to save before you render. So click on save and then smash that render button. Alright, so I'm going to come back once the render is done and then do some post-production. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, so the render is finally done and now we can do some post-production. You can see that we have a nice clean render. We use the bucket render mode and you can see if you go to stamp, it took about 35 minutes to render this scene, which is a 1920 by 1080 render. Alright, so now we can use light mix and set up different lighting scenarios. Now for example, if I switch on this rectangle light here, that would just light up this light here. There's no noise as well. Let's switch off the background because we don't need just like this render as is. Alright, so I like this setting, so I'm going to save this out. I'm going to call this light mix 1. Now let's switch off the sunlight. So you can see we have a nice gloomy sort of a setting, which is also pretty nice. Or maybe we can also reduce the sunlight to get that gloomy sort of an effect. Alright, so let's save this out. Call this light mix _2. And then of course you can add additional layers. For example, you can add the white balance. We've already added a white balance and then we can sort of make it more cool like this, which looks pretty cool, or make it more warm. I think making it more cool looks nicer. And you can also switch on the sharpen effect and sharpen the render a bit more. Finally, the lens effect, if you want to increase the intensity of these lights here. How cool is that? Alright, so once you're happy, you can again save this out. You can also save the tree preset. So I'm going to save this, call this tree preset 1. And I'll save out the light mix setting as well. Call this light mix _3. And now to do the composition of post-production, you can see that we have different render elements. Since this is a fog render the fog separately. Then the grass materials here separately. Unfortunately, we didn't get the house materials. Now, if you want to get the house materials, then you could add the multi-matte render element and render again to get the house materials. And then we have the background in case you want to change the background color, Photoshop and so on. And then we also have the atmosphere to add additional atmospheric effects. Alright, so I'll switch on RGB, effects results, which is the final render, and then I click on 2 composite to start with our post-production. So first thing what I'll do is add the reflection and refraction layers on top of this glass material here. So I'm going to right click, go to new layer and click on render element. I'm going to select the reflection render element or refraction. So you can see if I switch this on, it just adds that extra reflection in the render. Similarly, let's add the reflection render element as well. So let's add reflection. You can see that it adds that extra reflection on the water material outside as well. Now, if you want to reduce the effect, you can, of course, by reducing the values here. Alright, and then we can also add the atmosphere render element. So right click, go to new layer, click on render element. And let's add the atmosphere render element. And once you've added the atmosphere, you can see there's more atmosphere in the scene. You can of course also multiply this. So for example, if I click on multiply, that would multiply the render element. But in this case, add should work well, or even soft light should work well. Or let's add this to add. So you can see extra atmosphere in the scene, which looks nice. You can also play with the lights here. Now, for example, if you want to make this, you want to show more of the sunlight, you can do that as well. So you get those God rays entering the scene. This is the sphere light. So let's leave the sphere light as is. Let's go to the sunlight. Make this one. So now you can see we have a lot of nice light entering the scene. How cool is that? Some God rays in the scene. Finally, once you're happy, you can click on save. and save this render out. And if you want to reduce the effect, you can also change the color to darker, and then you get a reduced effect. And then of course you can reduce the intensity of this and save this out as well. You can also amplify certain lights in the scene. For example, these sphere lights here or these mesh lights. So let me just go back to RGB color. Let's go to mesh light. Let's add a new render element. So right click, go to new, click on render element. And let's say you add the mesh light. So you can see that boosts the mesh light. You can also add the sphere light in this case. That would work better. And then of course you can increase the intensity of the sphere light. How cool is that? I'm going to save this out. If you want to do some further post-production, you can add a LUT file, for example. So let's add a LUT file, a lookup table. Let's load a lookup table. You can see that we have these Kashmir LUT files that we got from the internet. So let's load this in. You can see that that just adds that extra fog effect in the scene, which looks pretty cool. And let's add an additional LUT file as well. So let's add another lookup table. And let's load, for example, number 2. You can also change the position of these LUT files so that it's applied on all the tags. So now it becomes super dark. So if you want to reduce the effect on the entire scene, then of course you can reduce the effect like this. And you can also change the blending mode. For example, if you keep it to soft light, that would make it dark. Lighten works better, where it adds fog to the entire scene. Alright, so this looks nice, and this will be the cover of our render as well. Alright, so I'll click on save and call this number 4. And let's open those files. Alright, so this is the different renders that we're able to create with this workshop. Sort of cinematic and sets a mode in the scene as well. I would highly encourage you guys to set up different other views and create renders. Alright, so we come to the end of this course. Please do share your work in the class assignments. And please do leave a review if you found this course useful. I'll see you guys in the next workshop and course. Cheers.